Greetings, everyone. My name is John Branch Jr., and I am the All of Us coordinator for Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. I also serve as the fraternity's Southern Regional Polaris. And on behalf of our 22nd International Grand Polaris, Andre R. Manson, our Grand Executive Board, and the Grand Council, I bid you greetings and welcome to this program we have tonight. I also want to give a special thanks to the people who work with me on the All of Us team. And that is the assistant coordinator for All of Us, who is also our director of health initiatives, Brother Victor Peoples, and our international director of marketing, who is also our social media lead, Brother Gibbs Hightower IV. Today, we're going to be talking about a special topic with All of Us and precision medicine. We're going to discuss it in the fields of abuse. But let's talk about All of Us first and precision medicine. First of all, the All of Us research program is inviting 1 million people across the U.S. to help build one of the most diverse health databases in history. Participants from all backgrounds are welcomed. We plan to use the data that we obtain to learn how our biology, our lifestyle, and our environment affect our health. The All of Us research program is providing a public resource that already has volunteers, a secure infrastructure, and data from medical researchers. Also, All of Us is working actively with partner organizations in our communities to build trust in these same communities and help educate people with the importance of research. The main thrust of All of Us is precision medicine. So what is precision medicine? Precision medicine is based on the individual. It can help us learn the best way to stay healthy and to provide physicians with a better understanding of how to approach individuals differently. Precision medicine is about finding healthcare solutions that meet the needs of diverse individuals and diverse communities. This approach to medicine can change the way we treat disease. And more research that includes people from all walks of life is needed to make precision medicine a widespread reality. At the same time, we also understand the negative effects that can occur within precision in medicine, including a lot of trial and error and even life-threatening side effects. No community, I believe, is more susceptible to this than not victims, but survivors of different kinds of abuse. The Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated is proud to have developed the iShield National Initiative, which says Iota is saving, healing, improving, and empowering lives daily, which focuses on domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, elder abuse, and child abuse/bullying. The survivors of these types of abuse have different sort of medical issues that we may not know about, whether it's medical or whether it's from a public health perspective. The purpose of this discussion tonight is to see the relationship between these two and how we can help better serve these communities. And what better way than to have an all-star panel that will be moderated by another all-star himself. The brother I'm speaking about, who is this all-star, is, as I mentioned earlier, assistant coordinator for the All of Us initiative for Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, and who also serves as the fraternity's National Director of Health Initiatives, Brother Victor Peoples.
So I thank you for that, Brother Branch. Brother Gibbs behind the scenes, I appreciate all that you're doing. With precision medicine, but more importantly with this program that's we're hosting this evening. April, currently in April. So April is deemed as the Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it's an annual campaign to raise public awareness about sexual assault and educate communities and individuals on how to prevent sexual violence. It is observed in the month of April, and each year during the month of April, state, territory, tribal, and community-based organizations, rape crisis centers, government agencies, and businesses, campuses, and individuals plan events and activities to highlight sexual violence as a public health, human rights, and social justice issue, and reinforce the need for prevention efforts. Tonight, we're going to discuss some issues regarding sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. More importantly, also, we will have some individuals talking about the trauma effects and then the mental effects of this as well. I will make a disclaimer that this may get dicey or may trigger some. So if in the event that anyone is having issues or anything of the sorts, all of the panelists that are centered here tonight are experts within their fields, and they have the know-how, knowledge, and capabilities to help walk someone through anything that may be a trigger for them or anything of the sorts. So at this time, I would like to bring to the stage or to the screen Ms. Jomel Eric. And Jomel currently serves as the director of not domestic violence, assault for the Attorney General's office of the state of Ohio, David Yost, and she will give her mini bio. And just to be able to listen to her story, I think everyone will find astounding. So at this time, Jomel Eric, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Jomel Aird. I'm the Director of Victim Services for our Human Trafficking Initiative. I'm at the AG's office, and tonight I'll be talking to you guys all about domestic violence specifically. I've been a victim advocate for almost 11 years now. I started my career in South Florida, where I'm from, and came up to Ohio in 2017 and had the opportunity to work as a victim advocate embedded full-time on our Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force. So all of our investigations and cases that were being investigated, I would be working alongside those victims and survivors all the way through prosecution. So thank you for having me here tonight. And I believe Brother Gibbs has the PowerPoint, which I'm going to share with you all tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope. Okay, you can go ahead to the next slide. So some of the basics. So with domestic violence, I want to do some myth busting first. There's some misconceptions that exist, and I'm just going to kind of tackle that and kind of go into that. Only women are victims is a big misconception that people believe that men can't be victims, which is not the case at all. Men definitely can be victims along with children. Only physical abuse is domestic violence. No, there are other things that are involved in domestic violence, like verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, so just a few examples. Domestic violence only happens in romantic relationships. That's also a myth. It can happen amongst family members. If you have a roommate as well, if you're living with someone, so it's not just in an intimate partner kind of situation. Also, domestic violence is only a heterosexual relationship. This is also something that if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, you're also experiencing, they can also experience this as well. It's okay because it's prevalent in my environment, culture, or my family. This one is huge because a lot of us, depending on how you've been raised or what you've been exposed to, a lot of people may think that somebody putting hands on another person is okay, it's normal, it's just what happens. But again, that's not healthy at all. Next slide. So what is domestic violence exactly? It says the purposeful and deliberate behavior in order to gain power and control over another household or family member. Behavior can be a pattern of coercive acts that may include physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, and also spiritual and religious abuse. Kind of thinking about culturally what might be prevalent in that community and utilizing those spiritual and religious things to kind of have that power and that control. By the way, if anybody has any questions, I believe you can be able to put that in the comments section. Next slide. So this is what's called the power and control wheel. And these are all the different ways that an abuser can be able to have power control over someone that they are victimizing. Whether that's by intimidation, verbal attacks, isolation, keeping somebody away from support systems or away from being able to reach out for help, minimizing, denying, blaming, gaslighting will also go in that category as well. Using other loved ones as a way of power control. Many times you'll also see pets also used as a way because that is a loved part of the family. And so an abuser may choose to use that dog or the cat or whatever animal is in the house as another way of having that power and control. abusing authority, economic control, being very controlling with the finances and what they are allowed to spend, not allowed to spend, where they're allowed to go, if they're allowed to work. I know I worked with a survivor in one of my cases in Florida, and she was in a marriage for about 20 years. And when we got her case and she finally was able to call the police, and she called me one day because she said, you know, you're the only person I can think of to call. I don't even know how to write a check. I've not been allowed to touch a checkbook. I haven't been allowed to open a bank account for the last 20 years. I don't know what to do or how to go about doing this. And so I was kind of helping her with that safety planning, and also kind of helping with that road to independence, if you will, and kind of helping her reconnect with support systems that were part of her life previously. And then also using coercion and threats. So all these things are, an abuser may use one or more of these things in order to have that power and control over someone else. Next slide. So on here, if you click one more time, there's a picture. This is an interesting statistic that says 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. Oh, go back. Maybe the picture's not showing up. It's all right. It's all right. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime, and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in his lifetime. So if you think about the communities that you're part of, maybe the friend group that you have, maybe the family that you have, maybe however many people are here on this call right now, you look at the statistic, this is pretty outstanding to think about that. And so this is not something that is just, you know, far reaching, or it may never touch your life or someone that you know. It's quite possible that there is someone that you know that has experienced it or that will experience it. For me, I grew up in a domestic violence household, and I thought what was happening in my household was normal. So when I would go to my friends' houses and I would see how their parents would interact with each other, and they are loving and just kind of interacting with each other in just such a, what I called was this like gooey, gushy kind of way that made me uncomfortable. I thought they were strange because of what I was used to seeing in my environment. And my environment told me that what was happening at home was normal, and things outside of that was not normal. So just kind of keep that in mind, the amount of people that may have experienced these things or may be a witness to it if they don't experience it directly. Next slide. So here's some barriers to assistance. A lot of times people say, you know, why doesn't this person just leave this person? Why don't they just end the relationship? Why don't they just call the police? You know, there's so many dynamics that are part of the why when trauma is happening. So for one thing, there's social isolation. Over time, that person went from having, you know, friends and family in their corner and being able to have those connections. And what that abuser is going to do is try to create space, try to create opportunities to keep this person isolated, so that way they don't have anybody to turn to. And so they may use tactics like sowing seeds of hate or aggression, or saying things like, you know, these people don't really have your best interest in mind. I'm the only one who can be there for you. I truly love you. Things of that nature. And it's truly kind of create this space until now they truly feel isolated. Now if they do feel like they want to reach out, there's been so much time that's passed, or there's some bridges that have been burned, and now they feel like they can't connect with those people anymore. Mental health illness as well, whether it's something like depression or bipolar disorder, or anything even further than that, PTSD as well. These are some things that, based on what someone's experiencing, may also create an extra layer of barriers to them reaching out for assistance, or them believing that they will be believed. Right. So an abuser may also say, well, you know what, you're not in your right mental state. So if you call the police, they're not going to believe you, because I'm going to tell the police that you're not well, or that you're on certain kinds of medications and things of that nature. So an abuser may also utilize that person's mental health illness as a weapon against them. Lack of services. When you think about the number of domestic violence shelters that exist, for the majority of them, they serve women. Right. And so we think about our male victims and survivors, our trans victims and survivors, persons with disabilities as well, and think about the amount of services that aren't exactly the same amount that they have access to. That's for sure a barrier. And on top of that, when it comes to men, it's also more underreported. Right. And so when we think about our society and the intentionality that has been placed on boys don't cry, men don't cry, all these different kind of things that are kind of part of that toxic masculinity. And then on top of that, if they're experiencing abuse, who do I turn to? You know, especially if it's at the hands of somebody else that nobody may quote unquote believe me what's going on. They're kind of thinking about those things. Law enforcement as well. Many times a victim might end up being arrested and not the perpetrator who is causing the abuse, right? So being able to be believed by law enforcement as well. Legal support may not be able to have the right financial security to be able to file for a divorce, to be able to go to court and file for, a restraining order, or to have custody over the kids, or whatever those things might be, or evictions, all those things. So these are all things that a victim or survivor is thinking about and can become a barrier to having some sort of assistance. And I mentioned earlier about the social isolation. So you have the one where you have social isolation from programming and resources, and also social isolation from those supportive networks that were part of their life before. And if anybody thinks of any other ones, feel free to drop it in the chat or in the comments. Next slide. So here in Ohio, this is what the law is for domestic violence. It's a misdemeanor of the first degree. And it says no person shall knowingly cause or attempt to cause physical harm to a family or household member. No person shall recklessly cause serious physical harm to a family or household member. And no person by threat or force shall knowingly cause a family or household member to believe that the offender will cause imminent physical harm to that family or household member. So again, it doesn't have to become physical. You can also be, again, by threat or force, and believe that this offender will cause that imminent physical harm to that person's person, if you will. Next slide. And so these are some other related crimes that might also be involved in a domestic violence situation or case. So you have a felony level domestic violence, which is when you have one or more prior convictions, that the perpetrator has one or more prior convictions, or if the victim is pregnant and the defendant is aware that the victim is pregnant, then that will increase it from a misdemeanor of the first degree to it being a felony level domestic violence charge. It says knowingly cause or attempt to cause physical harm to a family member or household member. So we have also abduction and kidnapping are things that you would also see that might be charged, aggravated burglary, violation of a protection order, if there are prior convictions, and menacing by stalking. So stalking as well. I've worked a couple of stalking cases also in Florida, and these things often escalate. And when you have somebody that is trying to, receive that help and have that protection order, and you have somebody who just will not leave them alone, these other things can end up happening as well. So definitely important to know what the laws are where you live, and also to recognize what resources are available, so that way someone you may know, or if you yourself are in a situation, can be able to know how to get help. Next slide. So these are some of the DV dynamics that people may say, a victim may say, it didn't really happen. I lied about what happened. I fell. I was just mad at him and wanted him to leave. I exaggerated. Actually, I did this to myself. He or she didn't have a weapon. He or she didn't mean to do it. It's only a problem when they drink. It wasn't that serious. I was only choked a little bit, right? These are some of the excuses and some of the ways to kind of help navigate through what just happened, and also not allow for people that they are coming in contact with to know what's really going on. But also there is this the surprise and the shock when, especially somebody that you've built rapport with and you've built trust with, and then they break that trust and they do something. There's a lot of breakthrough that's happening, or understanding, or processing is what I'm looking for. There's a lot of processing that is happening for that person to understand what just really happened. I can't believe this happened. Also, how do I now almost protect this person at the same time? Next slide. On that last one, it says I was only choked a little bit. I just wanted to touch on strangulation. So strangulation is pretty serious, and a lot of times we use the word choking very loosely, and just to kind of help people understand. So you choke on food and you strangle people, right? And so if we think about the word, usually when you hear the word strangle, it's kind of like more of an intense word, right? And so somebody's actively and intentionally choosing to cut off the airway and blood supply to this person's brain. That's what strangulation is. So if someone does not end up dying from that, it's called a non-fatal strangulation. But again, understanding that we choke on food, and when someone has pressure being applied to their neck from the outside, that is strangulation. So this website down at the bottom is a great opportunity if you want to learn more about it. This is something that I find super fascinating. There's so many information on this topic. Like, for example, the amount of pressure used to open a can of soda is all the pressure that is needed, if not less than that, in order to cut off the circulation to the brain. And so understanding how easy that is, and so that we can just be really mindful of that. So when kids are also playing the choking game, it's not an easy thing. It's actually they are being strangled, and there's some long-lasting effects that can happen to the body as well. Next slide. So this is called ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. You're going to hear Jen Rausch, who's going to speak on human trafficking, talk about this as well. And what this is just, it's opportunities to kind of look into what somebody may have experienced during their childhood. And there are certain parts that target the actual personal impact of someone's experience, like to their physical self, and also things that are related to the household dysfunction. It's a 10-question quiz or survey, if you will, and the website is down there on the bottom, www.aces2high.com. I definitely highly recommend anybody to go on that and kind of take that quiz. And what this does, it connects with, the different kinds of medical things that you may have in your future when people experience trauma in their childhood. It can also connect with some of our health issues that we're going to have when we're adults if we don't get some of those traumatic things kind of worked through, whether that's through therapy or healthy support systems. But it's super fascinating, and I think Jen's probably going to take a little bit of a deeper dive on how this ACEs became a thing and the study behind it. But just wanted to put that out there right now. So again, if you haven't written this website down, please do. aces2high.com. Next slide. So here are some of the victim's rights. And so if you are the victim in a crime, these are all of your rights that you have, which is the right to be treated with fairness and respect for the victim's dignity and privacy, the right to receive investigation information, the rights to notification, the right to confer with a prosecutor, the right to attend court proceedings. So any and all court proceedings that are happening for that offender, you have the right to attend. Rights to restitution as well, which is where you're being paid back for something, whether that was damages, medical bills, things of those kind of nature. That's what restitution is. Next slide. The right to be informed in a timely manner of any plea bargain or deferred prosecution agreement. The victim can make an impact statement that can be in court. It can be written or submitted. So you have the opportunity for the court to hear from your voice, from your mouth, from your thoughts as you write something as far as how this crime has impacted you. The rights to be informed of these rights, and also the Crime Victims' Right Act and Marsy's Law made these rights constitutional rights. Next slide. So as we go back one. Oh, never mind. Forward, sorry. So Vine link is something that if somebody is arrested and you're the victim of a crime, you can be able to log on to this and sign up to get access to know when this person is being released. You'll be able to register. They won't know that you're registered for it. Anybody could register for it, whether you're a victim in that case or not. And if there's any sort of custody statuses that are happening, if there's any sort of change in where they're moving to or they're getting released, you will get a notification in real time that lets you know that. Next slide. So just a few things to consider. As we talk about the topic of domestic violence, some things that we should be doing as a community, as a family, as friends, as groups, create safe spaces for open and honest conversations that are judgment-free. Talk and learn about healthy relationships and healthy family dynamics and environments, what they look like. Again, not everybody has had that positive example growing up. Talk and learn about the importance of counseling and mental health treatment as well. It can be pretty tabooed, but I think we're starting to move towards an era where lots of people are starting to be more open about going to therapy. Talk and learn. When you see something, say something, hold each other accountable, but also be able to reach out and call for help for somebody else. And then the ODVN, which is the Ohio Domestic Violence Network hotline number, is listed there at 1-800-934-9840. I think there's one more slide, I believe. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, you want to reach out to me, feel free to. There's my email address. So thank you so much, guys, for your time. And anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out.
So, Jamel, we do have a couple questions, and I personally, one question I do have, as a, I don't want to say survivor, but I guess I am. I lost a sister as a result of domestic violence. So there's really, or there isn't, or I haven't yet heard anything that discusses what a family would, or what family goes through, or siblings go through, and stuff of that nature if they've lost one as a result of domestic violence. Is there anything out there for that?
Yeah, there's definitely quite a few things out there, especially for support groups, where somebody in your family that experienced violence can definitely impact you, whether you saw it or not, whether they passed away or not. But there's definitely support groups and counseling that's available as well. I believe if you go on the ODVN website, there should be a tab where they have some resources for family members, and also especially for kids who witness things that are happening or that they may themselves have experienced domestic violence in their household.
Okay. Are there any social cues that can be recognized from those experiencing domestic violence?
Social cues. If so, there are a few. I would say if there is the abusers with the potential victim, they may be more controlling. They may control where that person's allowed to go and walk around or interact with certain people. You may notice that the victim may look to the abuser for how to answer a question, or if they should answer a question. If there's a consistency with injuries. I know for me, and those of you that are a person of color, bruising is something that doesn't happen as easily. That's visible to the eye, I should say, right? You can still feel tender and sore in places if you get injured. But as far as having visible things, sometimes depending on your skin tone, skin color, that might not be readily visible. And so being able just to check in with your friends and family members that as they're mentioning how they've gotten hurt, or you notice that they are limping, or there's stuff going on with their face or what have you, that you just continue to keep track of that and follow up with them about that, and being able to talk with them when they are not in the presence of possibly someone that could be abusing them, to try to have that like alone conversation if you can, and just be mindful of their safety. And maybe they may not be able to have that conversation with you over the phone because you don't know if the abuser is there listening and watching.
So you mentioned the African American community. So how acceptable or normalized in the African American community versus the white community has domestic violence become?
I don't know if I can really answer that question, honestly. I can speak from, so I was raised in a Caribbean household, Caribbean American household. And from what I know about that, on top of from the Black community that I've seen, I know that it could be prevalent to have someone in your family, maybe mom, grandma, auntie, whoever, or that has experienced it, but people don't really talk about it. It's kind of like this existing thing that we all know as a family, but we just kind of navigate around, right? People, whether you're at a barbecue, or you guys are all hanging out, or maybe everybody knows that Uncle so-and-so or whomever has done these things, but nobody's actually holding that person accountable. So they're still having access to the family, they're still having access to the person they're abusing, and nobody is also like standing, at least it's not seen visibly that someone is standing up to that person, let them know that, hey, we are here for this person, and we're going to be able to stand in that gap for that person and fight for them as hard and as much as we can. So I've seen that. Again, I can't speak for the white community, but I know domestic violence doesn't happen more to one community than another. I believe it's something that is happening everywhere, because it takes somebody who chooses to want to have power and control over another person, to recognize where they're vulnerable. And that doesn't matter what skin color, race, creed, or anything of that nature. It's more of an individual thing, I think. And many times hurt people, right? And so a lot of times you also see that a lot of abusers grew up in a household where there was abuse that was happening. And that was also learned behavior. It doesn't excuse it at all. But again, if we are not being intentional of giving the help that is needed for those that are being impacted, it just continues that cycle. You have this generational cycle that continues to happen, and nobody really like being able to get the help that they need. So I hope that answered your question in some way.
Yes. So my last question for you: has pop culture or social media made it more or less difficult to detect domestic violence?
To the last part, you cut out for a second.
I'm sorry. Has pop culture and social media made it more or less difficult to detect domestic violence?
That one to me is tricky. I would say because there are times where let's say in music and in videos, you might actually see domestic violence happening, and it gives this idea that it's okay or it's normal, right? And on top of that, you may have situations where there's a lot of victim blaming as well, and people who are not holding others accountable because their fame is more important, or they love the way that they sing, or they like the way their skill that they do, but they are abusing other people, and it's kind of like, let's just turn a blind eye to that because of X, Y, and Z. So I think if we can be more intentional with holding those in that spotlight accountable, the same way we would want to hold those that are in our proximity accountable, I think that would be helpful in that, and then also allowing victims to be believed and not just taking on this assumption that there's got to be more to the story, and that's it, or that they're not believed, or if there's a settlement for something, then that means that their abuse was not real, and that's not the case.
Okay. So, Jamel, I appreciate you. I know you have something planned for this evening, but if you could still stick around for however long you can, that will be great. At this time, we're going to bring Jennifer Rush to the screen. She's the legal director of the Human Trafficking Initiative for the state of Ohio under the Ohio Attorney General David Yost. Jennifer?
Hi, thanks for having me. All right, I'm going to try to share. Let's see if this works. Ta-da! Thank you for having me, everybody. I have the pleasure of working with Jamel every day. She is the Director of Victim Services for our initiative, and I am the Legal Director. Before joining the Ohio Attorney General's office, I was with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in Columbus, Ohio for almost 20 years. I spent 15 years of that in our Special Victims Unit, which handles all of the kinds of cases that you all are talking about, or we all, I should say, are talking about here today. And so they started our initiative at the Attorney General's office, and we focus on human trafficking. So what I want to do is just give you some really quick, basic information about human trafficking. This will barely scratch the surface, but I want to make sure that we get just even a little bit of information is great, right? So as an initial matter, what is human trafficking? It's a multi-million-dollar industry where people are treated like goods. It can either be labor trafficking, sex trafficking, or a combination of both. You'll also see other kinds of trafficking, but those are the ones that we primarily see here, especially in the United States. In Ohio, where I am, I know that we have people from all over the United States watching this evening. In these situations, someone forces another person to engage in sex for money or to work for little or no money. So you can see the sex trafficking as the initial part and labor as the other. And when they cross over, you might see that in the illicit massage industry. You might also see that, honestly, with sex trafficking when they are forced to work for their drugs or long periods of time when they don't want to, things like that. It can easily cross over into labor trafficking as well. And you can see there that there's this language that somebody's forced to do it. In Ohio, our language is compel. In the federal system, the language is force, fraud, or coercion, excuse me. And in most of our other states, the language tracks either one of those things. And so as a prosecutor or as a law enforcement investigator, they have to figure out what is that force that's being exerted upon the victim or the survivor, however they'll choose to be addressed. And what we have found is that that force can be physical, it can be mental, it can be verbal, it can be emotional, It can be almost anything. And it is the responsibility of the law enforcement official and the prosecutor to kind of get to the bottom of that and figure out what is at the heart of it so that we can get a case put together, but more importantly, so that that victim can get the appropriate services and get their needs met so that they can continue on their journey to healing. So this is a heat map from the Polaris Project. Anytime you need some basic, quick information, statistics, things like that, I would suggest that you go to the Polaris Project. They are a national organization and they track all sorts of information from the entire United States. They also have a national hotline. I'll give you the number at the end of my presentation. But this heat map essentially is a color-coded version of all the calls to the national hotline. And you can see, find where you guys are. For us, for me, in Ohio, you can't even really see where it is, right? Because it's so hot there, and that means that there's a higher volume of calls there. Now, that could be a good thing, right? Because your community is aware and they're reporting things. But in the alternative, it could be a bad thing because there's that much for them to call and report, right? Something kind of unique and interesting about Ohio, I use the term interesting loosely, is that I think a lot of people think, oh, Ohio, don't you have a lot of farms and things like that? So maybe labor trafficking. Well, we're actually have a pretty big opioid epidemic here in the state. We have an extensive highway system that connects us to many other states. And we are within, let me get the statistic right, 600 miles of 60% of the United States population. So basically a car ride. And that's what makes Ohio an attractive location for traffickers, unfortunately. So just like Jamel did some myth busting for you about domestic violence, I want to do the same thing for human trafficking. I think that this is especially important now because I just got sent, I will admit to you that I am not on TikTok, but I do have a 15-year-old and I am aware of what TikTok is and I have seen TikTok videos, but there is a myth or kind of this rumor, viral social media message being spread across TikTok. We would see that happening on Facebook. We would see it on Instagram, things like that. And so when we perpetuate these myths, we're really doing a disservice to the people that are suffering from trafficking. So what is it not, right? Jen, you're telling us this disservice. What are the myths? So it is not people in a white van grabbing victims from the mall. So think about your mall. Here in Central Ohio, it's the Polaris Mall. There are always reports about this person that was following my daughter at the mall. There was a van or somebody followed them in the bathroom. There have been things about zip ties on windshield wipers. The latest one had something to do with that very same idea. Recently, we had around Valentine's Day, someone put a bunch of roses on cars in a Walmart parking lot. And that was seen as some sort of ploy by traffickers, anything to delay you from getting in your car, things like that. I will tell you that the Walmart story turned out to be somebody who got way too many flowers from their significant other, and they thought that they would spread some Valentine's Day joy. However, it got reported to the police as potential human trafficking and then spread like wildfire. So this does not mean you should not be aware of your surroundings and that other bad things might not happen. It just means that's not normally how human trafficking takes place. It's not always an issue for foreign nationals. We do have people involved in trafficking that have come to the United States from different countries, and it does happen in other countries. However, I will tell you that every case I prosecuted, except for one, involved people from the United States, and most of them were from Ohio. And so that being, obviously where I am. And so that's happening in your communities. It does not always involve chains or physical restraints. If anybody here is like a crime TV junkie, you might have seen there's a very specific Law and Order Special Victims Unit episode that Jamel likes to reference when we present together, where people are chained up or handcuffed to pipes and things like that. Now, physical restraints can be a means of compulsion that I talked about. However, that's not normally what we see. It doesn't have to involve chains or physical restraints. And under Ohio law and the federal law, that's not a necessary element. It's not only an issue for women. Much like domestic violence, we have men who are victims, we have women who are traffickers, and it can impact anyone and everyone. And it is not only a big city issue, it can happen anywhere. We like to tell people that if you have drugs in your community, you probably also have trafficking, but you also have rural areas where you might see more agriculture, you might see more construction, you might see more fill in the blank, and that is a place where trafficking can take place. So when I talk about this idea that it's not going to happen at the mall or in a van or the roses on the car in Walmart, well, okay, Jen, if it's not somebody getting snatched, what is it? So vulnerabilities is what trafficking is all about, really. Vulnerabilities are the heart, the cornerstone. I like to describe it as the crack in the door where the trafficker can get in and get to a victim. I will try to do Jamel justice because this is where she excels and talks about this particular slide. But think about this right here. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And on this slide, you can see that these are the things that as a human being, we all need, right? So when you start at the bottom, those are your really basic things. You need to sleep. You need air. You need food. You need water, right? Those are basic things that you need to survive. It also lists clothing because that's correct, right? You have to have seasonally appropriate clothing, and then reproduction. And that is more for us as human beings as opposed to on the personal level. So if I need a place to stay, let's say I'm homeless and I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any more couches to surf. I don't have anybody else who will take me in. And I need a place to stay. And someone says to me, you know what, come here, you look hungry, let me give you something to eat. I'll get a hotel room for you. And I'm pretty desperate. Maybe on day one, I'm going to say no. I'm like, no. Like there's got to be a string attached. But by day 5, when I haven't had anything to eat for a couple of days and it's cold and it's rainy, I might take them up on it. And then they're going to build a relationship with me or expect something in return. The next one is safety needs. So that can be your own personal security. It could be the security or safety of having a job, which then leads to resources, and then having your health taken care of, and then property. And I don't just mean any material thing, but necessary things to live. So again, any of these could be missing, and a trafficker could supply them. Love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization are the things that go up the rest of this. And I know that I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. So these seem like the higher kind of vulnerabilities and you can survive without them, right? But a lot of these ones towards the top are where traffickers kind of really sneak in. They build a relationship, they fulfill a need. Maybe you have a household where your family told you you're not going to amount to anything. I have a friend who's a teacher, and a young lady does her homework at school because if she does her homework at home, her family ridicules her and says, none of us went any further in school. Why are you doing that? That's a waste of time. And they tear her down. So if a trafficker provides her with positivity, with this kind of, I believe in you, I know you can do it, then they're going to trust them and build this relationship. And then once the relationship is built, then things start to flip. So when the relationship is begun and is in place, then the trafficker turns it into this kind of other relationship where they can take advantage of and exploit other people. A lot of our victims or survivors, whichever term they prefer, often have this underlying vulnerability, right? That made it easier for them to be trafficked, easier for this relationship to be built. A trafficker might show up as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, as a family friend, you name it. So they're going to build this relationship and then it's going to turn into you owe me. So they might also have some sort of prior sexual assault in their lives. Maybe they've had an abusive home life. Maybe they're a runaway, as I mentioned. And Jamel touched on this, the adverse childhood experiences. That's that 10-question quiz she mentioned. So when you go through that, the more, when you answer those questions, you get 1 point for every question that you answer yes to. The more you have, the more likely you are to be victimized. But alternatively, the more likely you are to engage in some sort of unhealthy or criminal behavior. As a prosecutor, I would see this come up with a lot of the defendants, right? So how did they end up at that defense table? Just like no little girl says, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up, no little boy or little girl, same applies to the prostitute piece, says I want to be a trafficker when I grow up. Doesn't say I want to engage in crimes, rob people, steal, nothing like that. So that it's how do they get where they are? This is where you can do the quiz. It's called aces2high.com if you're interested. I will also say that a score of 3 out of 10 is considered high. And one of the questions is whether your parents have been separated or divorced. That's huge, right? A majority of the population has that. You can kind of go down the rabbit hole. I'm going to stop myself because I can get really nerdy about this topic. But it is really fascinating because it can also have, if unaddressed, negative health consequences too. So you might not end up victimized. You might not end up an offender, but you could end up with health issues that could impact you for the rest of your life if we don't seek appropriate treatment. And to this point for tonight, this kind of specialized medicine or specialized treatment, recognizing the individual and their experiences. This is that same image that Jamel talked to you about. You can see that we have 5 kind of personal adverse childhood experiences and 5 that have to do with the household. So you have physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. You have physical and emotional neglect. So those are the 5 that are personal. And then the 5 that happen in the household that also impact the child are listed under household dysfunction. So things like an incarcerated relative, substance abuse, which includes excess alcohol usage, which does not rise to the level of alcoholism, by the way. Mother treated violently, which includes verbal abuse, like Jamel mentioned, mental illness in the household, and then separation or divorce, like I mentioned as well. So if you think about it, these can, it just sort of makes sense, but they figured this out. And it's really fascinating. So think about our trafficking victims. It's almost like, I like to think of it as layers, right? Layers of an onion. So they kind of have these, some of them might have these prior adverse childhood experiences. And then they have these additional vulnerabilities on the outside. And then they're going to be taken advantage of, exploited, and then they're going to have additional trauma on the outside. So you have these layers of current victimization. So they have complex trauma and they have guilt or shame that at some point along the way they said yes, right? Maybe they're in this relationship. I agreed to be with this person. I thought this person loved me. I thought this person was my friend. We also see family members trafficking each other as well. And maybe the first time that they went on a date or did some sort of sexual activity for hire, they agreed to it because it was for us. It was for a hotel room. It was for food, you name it. And so that can really make it confusing and it makes it hard for them to identify as victims, which when you combine that with some of the myths and the images we see in our culture, you can see how that might be difficult for victims to say, you know what, that's not me. I wasn't held against my will and chained up, but it's more of a mental piece. And it's difficult for them. And it can often take multiple interactions with law enforcement or advocacy groups before they're willing to talk. And then there's not a lot of resources like appropriate detox, housing, counseling. So it's really hard because remember, we got to get through all those layers. This is the Ohio statute I mentioned, Ohio and the federal law. So for anybody in Ohio, a lot of the other state statutes should look very similar. But essentially, it follows this action, means, purpose. So no person shall knowingly do any one of these things. Recruit, lure, entice, isolate, harbor, all of these things, knowing that they'll be subject to involuntary servitude, which is labor trafficking, or be compelled to engage in sexual activity for hire. We previously had this issue where Ohio was the last state to fix protecting 16 and 17-year-olds. We used to have to show that issue or element of compulsion. They finally fixed it as of 2 weeks ago. So that's great. And in Ohio, you can get 10 to 15 years as a felony of the first degree. And it requires sex offender registration. So I mentioned some of these things and I know I'm running short on time. So I'll go through these a little bit quickly, but this is what we see as our methods of conditioning. So this is that issue of compel or compulsion that I would have to show. A lot of it can mirror that DV cycle that Jamel showed you, where you have a honeymoon period, tension, explosion, and then that repeats. You do sometimes have confinement. You have beatings or torture. I've seen cigarettes used, things like that. cigarette burns. They might use free drugs or forced drug use. They'll make them be dope sick, not give them clean needles. There are also sexual assaults happening frequently in trafficking, and they often can control the victim's identification and movement. And due to the relationship building and long-term abuse that happens with trafficking, there's often a trauma bond that takes place, which makes it even more difficult for our victims to identify as victims. So here's what can you do when we're talking about trafficking? So many people are like, what can I do, Jen? So you can contact your local agencies and organize a hygiene or clothing drive. Make sure you check with them and see what they need or how they want to receive those materials. Host an event. Come to an event like this and invite a speaker. Raise awareness. Connect with your coalitions or groups in your area. Write notes of encouragement for survivors. They can go to a lot of these coalitions and they'll get them where they need to go, and that means a lot. Identify trusted community partners for services and reporting, and educate people on your culture. If there's something specific to your culture, your family, your needs, your whatever, make sure that people know about it. And make sure you have healthy conversations. Make sure you have safe spaces for conversations, whether it's for your friends. Be that safe person. Be the person that, like Jamel said, if somebody doesn't know that their household isn't quite right or isn't, has these ACEs, be the person that is safe for them to talk to about it. Talk about purchasing sex is not okay, that you need to take care of your mental health. Pornography can be dangerous. Talk about labor rights and laws, all of those things. As promised, here is the national hotline number, that Polaris Project number. If you see something, say something. You can either call this 1-888 number, or you could text to this Be Free 233-733. And that's how you can make a difference every day in your community. There's my contact and Jamel's contact in case you missed it on hers. And I can't thank you guys enough for the opportunity to come and present to you. And we are available and open for Jamel's favorite term, a deeper dive into the topic for anybody who's ever interested.
Well, thank you so very much, Jen. And a couple questions. Most think of human trafficking at truck stops or commercial street workers. What are other places that human trafficking may occur, or that,
Sure.
like we may not think, but it's going on?
Yeah, so those are actually two great places that trafficking can take place. It also takes place in hotels a lot. You might see with labor trafficking, you can see it in agriculture. There's actually a really fascinating and terrifying documentary about the Marion Egg Farm here in Ohio. It was produced by PBS. And you can take a look at that. That has to do with labor trafficking. You might also see that in restaurants, in construction, in kind of homes where you have family members or people working in homes. It could be a nanny situation. It could be somebody living in home. You can also see commercial sex in illicit massage industries. So that kind of crosses over between sex and labor trafficking. And you can see commercial sex in homes. I had a case where the kind of lure of the house was it's safer here than on the streets. And it turned almost into a brothel.
You had shown a picture that looked like the a weather map, yeah, with all the different colors: green, red, orange, and yellow. How are those calls tracked?
So those calls are tracked through that 1-888 number that I listed through the Polaris Project. So that's only calls to their number. So if somebody were to call their local police department, or if their local area has a local tip line, that's not even counted in that. So the Polaris Project itself tracks that data, but it's only the data coming to them.
All right. So those are the questions I have. And just because we're leaving some more for after everyone presents. So at this time, Jen, I appreciate you. And we're going to bring Ms. Sorrell Wheeler to the screen. Sorrell is the Sexual Assault Diversity Access Advocate. Did I say all that right?
You did. Perfect.
See how I'll be doing? See how? With Haven, who's based out of Michigan. So, Sorrell, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Victor. Thank you so much to the brothers of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. I'm excited to be here with y'all tonight, and I'm hoping that by the time I'm done talking, I have given you something to take away. As it was mentioned earlier, it is April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So you see, I've got my teal ribbon. So shout out to my survivors. If you're here, I believe you. I stand with you always. As I was introduced, I was properly titled. I am Cyrell, and I am the Sexual Assault and Diversity Access Advocate at Haven. We are located in Pontiac, Michigan. And I want to take some time to tell you folks about what sexual violence is. I want to tell you what it really looks like. I want to talk to you about what is your role in sexual violence. It's very easy to sit and say, well, that's not my problem. I don't have anything to do with that. I've never assaulted somebody. But it's a little more difficult to look in that mirror and take some time to say, okay, what's my part in this? So I'm going to hold you accountable tonight and ask you to look in the mirror and check yourself. And then I'm going to talk about what can we do about this problem, because it's everybody's problem. So the first thing I want to talk to you folks about is what is sexual violence, right? We have this idea that sexual assault and rape is this, oh, there's my presentation. I will be very honest with you folks. My presentation is light. I don't like to have a lot of words, but I'm engaging. So you'll get the point. So understanding sexual violence. We have this idea that sexual violence is the stranger behind the bush that will jump out and grab you and attack you in the middle of the night, this person that you don't know. The harsh reality of sexual violence is that majority of assaults are committed by someone that we know. It is more likely that the person who assaulted someone is someone you had a decent acquaintance relationship with and you knew something of them. Sexual violence in a nutshell, in like regular people talk, if you had to force or convince or manipulate someone into doing a sexual act with you, that is sexual violence. So it doesn't have to be this idea of I grabbed you or there was something that was absolutely heinous, the worst cases that we see. But those times when you were talking to someone and you had to ask them more than one time, or the song and it talks about how many drinks do I have to buy you to get you to go home with me, that's sexual violence. If someone has had a drink or has had drugs, legally they can't consent to you. So when you take advantage of someone's psyche or you take advantage of the situation to get what you want, that is sexual violence, okay? And I want to talk to you folks about what that really looks like. I just told you that it's not this, it's not always this stranger who's jumping out from the bushes, right? It's very rarely that. I'm going to give you folks a few statistics, and they're probably a little shocking, but I ask that you roll with me. So as you see on this slide, I'm going to give you some things that aren't on this slide. 1 in 4 Black girls will be sexually assaulted by the time they turn 18. I gave a few seconds to sit with that because that's absolutely shocking. For all of you who are familiar with the book Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, shout out to Dr. Monique Morris, who wrote this book. She talks about how little Black girls are told that they are always too grown or too this or too sexualized or too that. Why is that? Why is this group of people not protected? Because society sees this group of people, especially Black women. We know that Black women deal with sexual violence at a higher rate than other communities. This group of women is always seen as the strong Black woman, right? The narrative that Black women are carrying the world on their back. And so when people say like, oh, like Black girls are being assaulted, like, no, that's not possible. They're too grown. They're too sexy. They showed too much. But that's because the culture that we live in is sexualizing and adultifying this group of people. Okay. And so that is one statistic for you. The next statistic that I'm going to give you, for every 1 Black woman that reports her sexual assault to the police, there are 15 that won't. I'm going to say it again. For every one Black woman who looks like me, who reports their assault to the police, there are 15 that won't. And so if those are the numbers of reports, I'm sure you can only imagine the number of things that we don't know about. And why don't we know about it? Because Black women are seen as the strong Black woman. So you see how it's this cycle. If women, especially Black women, are supposed to be strong and deal with everything, then of course, who's going to be there when they're assaulted? A few statistics to start us off. As I move along in this conversation with you all, I told you that I was going to ask you, what is your role in sexual violence? Whether you're a perpetrator or not, we all have some skin in the game in terms of sexual violence, regardless of if you have a sister, regardless of if you have a mom, regardless of if you have a niece. You know somebody on this planet. Another statistic I'm going to give you folks. Every 73 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted. 73 seconds is not a long time. Trust me. I can probably hold my breath for 73 seconds. And so I ask you folks that are watching here today, sit with that. When you go to work, when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the doctor's office, when you drop your kid off at school, when you get in the car to go anywhere. Earlier in this moment, I told you that 1 in 4 Black women are going to be sexually assaulted. So think of 4 Black women, and now think of one of them. That's a ton of people. So what's your role? We know that perpetrators commit these crimes, and I'm sitting at my desk. I have a sign next to me that says, "What causes rape?" Rapists cause rape, right? And it should be so clear, black and white. But earlier, Victor asked a question. He said, how does culture and pop culture and the media and all of that play into this world of sexual violence that we have, right? And so something that I'm going to bring to your attention, I as a Black woman, as someone who has been raised in the Black community, I'm going to bring up a very touchy subject for some folks. When we look at R. Kelly was caught on video, and R. Kelly went to trial. And I think we all know what happened. And so when we look at culture, our culture tells us it's okay to do whatever you want to women, especially Black women, because what's going to happen? Nothing. Nothing. And so think about it. Although you may not be a perpetrator, although you might not be the one actually committing the sexual violence, do you check your friends when they make a rape joke? Do you ask them to explain to you, why was that funny? I bet you if you ask somebody to explain a rape joke to you, it's not funny anymore. Why? Do you participate in victim blaming? What is victim blaming? When you ask a woman, well, what were you wearing? Why does it matter what I was wearing? I don't care if I walk outside with no clothes on. If I say don't touch me, or I didn't give you permission to touch me, don't touch me. I want to talk to you folks about what consent is. That is the biggest part of this conversation that I want to give you folks today. And when I ask you to reflect on your own self, do you know what consent is today? Consent is ongoing, active, engaging participation in the acts that you're committing without coercion and without threat. So if we go somewhere, you say, Sarah, you want to go somewhere? I say, yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, I think that's going to be real fun. Okay, that's okay. Now, if you ask me, do I want to go somewhere? And I say, and you say, well, listen, if you go with me, I'm going to give you da-da-da-da. No. And I am never making light of sexual assault, but when we bring it down to regular terms, we can make it make sense of what consent is. When we start to talk about sex, people say, oh, well, men just can't control themselves, or even women, anybody who's assaulting, well, they couldn't control themselves, or the messages were mixed. To everyone who's in the audience today, I want you to be real and reflect with yourself. If you were trying to engage in a sexual act with someone, if they weren't ongoing and engaging and they weren't like, I'm really having a good time, you know the body cues, like, yes, this is feeling good, I'm having a good time. If they weren't showing you those signs, did you keep going? Did you ask them? It's never lame to ask, is this okay? You okay with this? Consent can be very, very simple. And that is the biggest message that I want you folks to take away today in this Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Knowing what consent is your power, okay? Knowing that when you talk to your friends about who they were with last night, and if you hear them talking about, oh, well, yeah, I got them a drink, and then I talked to them into coming to my house. It's our responsibility as people in this world. It's our responsibility to stand up when we see things going on or when we hear things going on that don't sound okay. If someone had to convince you to take part in a sexual act, it's not consent. It's not. And that is the reality. So when I ask you to reflect on what you are putting into the world, you don't have to be assaulting people to be a part of the problem. Are you a bystander? If you see somebody who's like stumbling around, fumbling around, if you're at a party and you see somebody escorting them into a room, do you say something? Do you step up? If a survivor came to you and said, hey, I was assaulted and I need to talk to you about that, or I'm trying to figure out what I should do you blame them? Do you ask them a bunch of questions and give them an interview as if they were the criminal there? What do you do when you engage with those people? And so what I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give you some tools that you can use as we move through this world, as we move through our everyday lives. I'm going to give you some things that you can have to where you won't be a bystander, to where you won't be a perpetrator, to where you can say like, yeah, I don't stand for sexual violence, not in my community. And if I've got Black men in this audience, I hear Black men always talk about how they want to protect Black women. Well, the statistic that I just told you was that 1 in 4 Black girls will be sexually abused before they are 18. So we got a problem, y'all. We got a problem. So what can you do? I've told you about the problem. We can talk about the problem all day, right? What can you do? What can you do to change this and to be better? Number 1, talk to people about what consent is. When you leave here today, tell somebody like, yeah, did you know that every 73 seconds somebody is sexually assaulted? That's outrageous. It's outrageous. Did you know that for every 1 Black woman that does report, there are 15 that are not? There are 15 that are not getting services. There are 15 that are not getting emotional support. There are 15 that are not getting the care that they need to deal with their heart, to deal with their mental, to deal with their physical. There are 15. 15. As a Black woman, that breaks my heart. So what can you do? Number 1, talk about what consent is. Teach your friends, teach your children, teach your neighbors, teach everybody. Consent is ongoing, active participation. Yeah, this is good. I'm feeling good. I'm having a good time. Yeah. And there cannot be any coercion. There's no convincing, like, let me talk you into this. You can't do that. And there can't be threats. If you do this, then I'm gonna, That's number 1. Number 2, hold people in your community accountable. We know that, I'm speaking to folks in a fraternity here, especially on college campuses, sexual assault is rampant. Rampant. I cannot tell you the amount of horror stories that I've heard about frat houses. Why is that? When your friend tells a rape joke, ask them, why was that funny? Explain it to me. And I bet you it's not as funny anymore because rape is not funny. Sexual violence is not funny. And it never has been. And it never will be. So moving forward, it is our responsibility as people in this community, as people who say that we care about Black people, as people who say that we are going to take care of ourselves. It's important to know that there are agencies that can help survivors. And so if you consider yourself to be an ally, you say, I am not a part of the sexual violence problem. Okay, I need you to hold yourself to know some agencies in your area. Agencies like mine, I have to give a shout out to Haven. So for any of you who are in the Michigan area, please know that Haven is an agency that is here to support you. And if Haven's not the spot for you, that's okay. We'll get you connected to another agency that can support you. For my friends who are in Ohio, for my friends who are in Maryland, wherever you're tapping into this live stream today, get on the internet and Google sexual assault agencies near me. So if a survivor reaches out to you, you're able to say, listen, I believe you, and I got somewhere you can call for support. The last thing I want to talk about with you folks today here is we know in the Black community, there's this culture of silence, right? I can remember my mama telling me, listen, you don't take our problems outside this house. That's a no. And I'm sure people in the audience can relate to that today. Something I want to share with you all, the culture of silence that we have, it's time out. I heard Jomel mention earlier, we all know that one uncle who, you just know, don't be around him. And so it's time for us to call out that uncle. It's time for us to say, listen, we're not going to stand for that. And when our little girls in our family or when our women in our family tell us like, yeah, this happened to me, that's not the time to question them, to ridicule them, to tell them, well, you had this on and you, That's the time that you say, okay, I believe you. I support you. And I'm going to do anything that I can to help you get through this. Because I guarantee you, if you shut that survivor down, especially a Black woman who probably it took a lot for her to ask you for help, you think she's going to ask somebody else? The answer is likely no. So I give you some takeaways to take with you all today as I wrap up what I'm saying. If survivors reach out to you and they say, listen, I'm going through something, 2 things you can keep in your pocket. I believe you. I support you. And you can ask them, what can I do to be supportive for you today? And if they say, listen, I need some help finding an agency where I can get free services. Okay, I got you. I need to know about legal options. It's important to know your rights in terms of sexual assault. Here at Haven, we are here for you today. Our crisis line is 248-334-1274. If you need support, even if you're not in Michigan, we're connected to other agencies. We can sit on the phone with you, we can chat with you, and we can help get you where you need to be. To any of my survivors who are watching this live stream, you are not alone. I stand with you every day. I go to work every day to teach people, especially my community, sexual violence is not okay. It's not a survivor problem. It's an everybody problem. Our culture tells us that men can do whatever they want to women and nothing's going to happen. I know that's true because for every 1,000 cases that get to the prosecutor's office for sexual assault, only 13 are going to be picked up for charges. I'm going to tell you that again. For every 1,000 cases that get submitted to the prosecutor's office for sexual assault, criminal sexual conduct, only 13 are going to get picked up. With that being said, it's time for us to take some accountability and some responsibility for this problem. If you don't have consent, stop. And if a survivor reaches out to you, don't blame them. It's not their fault because there is nothing that anybody can ever do that will make them deserving of sexual violence. I thank y'all for having me here today. I'm open to answer any questions, and I'm open to support folks who need me.
Woo! Sorrel, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been a long day. I'm still at the office, but I do it every day. So I'm happy to be here with you.
Okay. Couple questions. So if you consent prior to doing drugs or drinking, going out or whatever, and end of the night, day, wherever it happened, you guys end up having sex. You consented prior. After the act, then you said, I didn't want this to happen. What happens there?
And Victor, that is the tricky part about it, right? Consent can be taken away at any time. If I say, yes, I want to, and 30 seconds later, I say, no, I don't want to, the answer is no, right? And so just like if I say, hey, Victor, you want to go to the mall next week? Next week, you might not feel like it. If I come and snatch you out your house and I tell you, well, Victor, you told me last week that you wanted to go to the mall, so you're going to the mall with me right now. You can't do that. So to answer your question, consent can be taken away at any time. And if someone has been intoxicated and you are not, if there's intoxication involved, it's best to wait until they are fully capable of consenting to you when they are not intoxicated.
Okay. What are mixed messages?
Mixed messages are an excuse to commit sexual assault. Mixed messages are not real in terms of sexual violence. We talk about that song. Who's that singer? Robin Thicke. I think he says blurred lines. If the line, like yes is yes. And if there is any variation of maybe, I don't know, then it's not consent. And that is the truth of the matter. Like, if you invited me to this presentation today and then I was like, I don't know, and then you had to keep pulling and pulling and pulling, you have now coerced me into doing something, right? So it's the same thing in terms of sex. Like, if there's any like, I'm sure all these folks here in this audience today, and I want you to be real with me too, Victor. You know, if somebody enjoying themselves, if y'all having a good time, y'all taking part, y'all doing y'all thing. If you have any doubt in your mind, if you have an inclination that like, maybe this person doesn't like this, you should stop.
So this question, next question is for actually you and Jennifer. When you mentioned 13 out of 1,000 individuals will actually go to court, 13 out of 1,000. Where's the disconnect? What's going on here? If 1,000 individuals have said, I have been sexually assaulted, I have not consented, I have been abused, I have been done, something has happened to me that I did not want. Here's the person, this is where it's happened, here's the quote unquote evidence, whatever the case may be. 13 out of 1,000. That's a problem. Now, this thing says, what's next? What's wrong with this picture?
You got it, Jen. What are you gonna share?
And I knew what Sorrel was doing. That I was over here like, I wish you could have seen me, Sorrel. I was like, yes. And then you said that, and I was like, oh my goodness. It's a really good point. Here's all I can say. I can speak from my personal experience. We had a special victims unit. We had special prosecutors who wanted to handle those cases. Nobody was forced to handle those cases. You had people that really cared about the issues and really wanted to work with people who had been sexually assaulted and any other kind of crime that fit within that. And I was, I can tell you that I personally did not reject or turn down 87% of my cases. So just on a personal level, that does not mean that Sorrel's statistics aren't correct. And so I think a lot of it has to do with education. It has to do with the people that are prosecuting the cases. It has to do with the law enforcement officials that are gathering the information, because, to her point, we can believe all we want, but if I don't have the evidence, and yes, what a person says is evidence, but not everybody. In your question, you said, here's when it happened, where it happened, and all the details. Sometimes people can't get you all of that. Maybe they were under the influence, maybe they have been drugged, maybe it's been over a period of time. And so we rely on our law enforcement officials to gather that information, or we rely on others to help fill in those blanks, or evidence to still be available in the form of, not necessarily DNA, but even anything else corroborative. And so sometimes we run into those obstacles, and that can be challenging because I have to prove specific elements for specific crimes. And so sometimes somebody might say, I was sexually assaulted, but we may not have all of the specific elements of specific crimes. So in Ohio, there's not a sexual assault statute. There are very specific sex offenses. And so that could be part of it too. I'm not going to make excuses. Sometimes people don't want to do the hard work, or if it's challenging, or they don't have the right information or knowledge, that could be a barrier too. And so I don't want to ignore that part of it, but
So, Jen, put a pin right there real quick. Sorrel, before you answer, hold on. We're going to bring Herschel Davis, MSNRN. Herschel, tell everyone what you do or what you've done in that respect.
I'm currently a registered nurse in the emergency department here in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm also clinical faculty at a local school of nursing. And so my hospital is a level 1 trauma center. So we deal with a lot of traumas that come in through the emergency department.
So with that being said, the number said, Sorrel said 13 out of 1,000 individuals are only being brought to trial. In your experience, X amount of individuals may have came through the emergency room that have been victims of sexual assault. And in that respect, can you kind of walk us through what you would be required to do during that time? And if an officer is involved, are you required to provide them?
So a patient presents to the emergency department, they get triaged by the nurse, they're seen by a provider. By law, we must make sure anybody's medically stable. I will separate out a physical assault from a sexual assault. A sexual assault will go to your local hospital that deals with sexual assault. In my town, there's one, and they have a forensic nurse examiner that works with the police, and the patient is escorted to that hospital if they consent. Now, here's the key. They have to consent to the examination, and that's not always guaranteed. In my state, it is not mandatorily by us to report the violence, either domestic or sexual. In my state, the only mandatory reporting is child abuse or vulnerable adults. And vulnerable adults is defined as neglect, self-abuse, or exploitation of a vulnerable adult aged 18 or lacking the physical or mental capacity to provide for their daily needs. Then it becomes a mandatory reporting situation. So again, it varies by state. And again, so in my state, if someone comes in for let's say a physical assault, if they consent, the police can be called, and then again they have to consent to take action. And that's the key part of this, is when Sorrel and Jen and the other panelists was talking, consent is the key factor. So it's for us as medical personnel, there's a fine line. And my job is, I take care of the patient, I listen, I deal, and then I can notify, etc. But we do have social workers and case managers, nurse case managers in the department to handle any types of these cases if they want to move forward. We do have police in the department, but again, the key is to consent. And I have seen situations where we know what's going on and we'll see the patient come back. We can even assign, let's say, someone to check up on the patient if they don't want to move forward, to try to, make sure they're okay. And again, try to provide the victim support. But even with that, they have to consent to that. You can't just come into somebody, follow them. Again, everything involves consent. And then when you talk about treatment, again, that varies. You're separating the psychosocial, which is the mental and the emotional, from the physical. And physical treatments can vary. And this is where we talk about where we're getting in medicine now to precision medicine, where you're trying to really gear our treatment modalities towards the individuals. And again, you're taking lifestyle, environment, cultural background, everything into consideration. But even with that treatment, and this is what people don't understand, they have to consent. So a person, we could see there's a lot going on, and they could tell us no, and they'll walk out the doors, and there's legally nothing that we can do.
So my question, because you guys keep saying this word consent, 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 consent.
Mhm.
So out of these 13 individuals, that means that 13 out of 1,000 consented to continue on with the charges, continue on with treatment, continue on through this process. Is that what I'm hearing? Or because everybody, you're shaking your head and you're doing your Mardi Gras fingers. So what is it?
I can share some, if that's okay. So I'll say, as an advocate, I am not legal representation. I am just charged with understanding, the criminal process, at least for, my county, Oakland County in Michigan, to where I can explain that to a survivor, to where they feel like they've got a good grasp on like what's going to happen. So, in my county, Oakland, the process that a person will go through when they report their assault, you report it to the police. That's going to get assigned to a detective. A detective's going to do their investigation. After that, everything is collected, the evidence, how Jen was saying, we're going to talk to so-and-so. If there's a sexual assault kit, we're going to get that. We're going to run the DNA. Okay. We're going to put it in a folder and we're going to send that to the prosecutor's office. Okay, great. There's going to be a prosecutor. They're going to read it. They're going to read it over, look at all the information, look at all the facts. From there, that prosecutor is going to decide, is the prosecutor's office, and keep in mind, this is the tricky part about sexual assaults. Like, yes, like if I was sexually assaulted, I was sexually assaulted. But if I report it, the prosecutor's office is responsible for protecting that county. Okay. So the prosecutor's office is not like your personal lawyer, like, look at you, girl. No, like they are charged with protecting this group. So, okay, like the prosecutor decides, do we want to pick up charges against this person or not for the state of Michigan? Like if we go to court, like it's going to be state of Michigan versus person who assaulted me. Okay. So at that point, that is what we're talking about with those 13 to 1,000. So every 1,000 reports that got sent to the prosecutor's office, only 13 of those came back with a, yes, we're going to take this. We want to pick up charges against this person. And like Jen was saying, like there are some complexities, like we know criminal sexual conduct in the first degree, the fine print, there's always fine print. So if it's not like matching these little caveats, well, maybe we can't charge with that. But if it matches the stuff in the second degree, okay, maybe we can charge with that. Like there's very fine language. And so to answer your question, Victor, of like, what's next? That's why it's important, like as people in our community, we need to write our legislators. We need to write the people who are in charge of making laws. We need to talk to the people who are making decisions about our safety. What does justice look like, right? We also know, Victor, like what we're talking about with consent, the criminal justice system isn't an option for everyone, right? We talk about this as the Derek Chauvin trial just passed and we got a guilty, whoop, whoop, but we know that that's not common. So there are going to be people who don't want to engage with that system because they have shown, well, they're not going to do anything for me. And so what can we do to go beyond that? Well, if I can't get justice through the criminal justice system, it's important for agencies like the one I work at, the nonprofit I work at. We need to look into like restorative justice circles. Well, what's that, Cyrell? A restorative justice circle is a conversation between the survivor, the person who was harmed, and the person who did the harming. And you're able to come up with some SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. So I can like check in with you on those goals, and we can say, has the person who was harmed, have we corrected the wrong? That is the conversation we need to be having about survivors, about like what's next? Like, how do we heal that harm? So I hope that like gives some context to what we're saying.
So with that, so through this process, someone's been sexually assaulted. They're going through the process of reporting. The 13, I'll just keep saying 13 because now that's stuck in my head. I'm sorry. So the 13 out of the 1,000 that has experienced this trauma, there's this mental component that they are experiencing as well. So with that, Dr. William White, who is the Director of Psychological Services, through this process, first of all, Dr. White, can you introduce yourself, please, young man?
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So my name is Dr. White. So I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and a doctorate in theology. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I currently serve as Director of Psychological Health at Robins Air Force Base. And the population I currently serve at work, of course, is a military population. And then I have a part-time private practice as a psychotherapist. I am a member of the National Association of Social Workers, the National Association of Black Social Workers, and a life member of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, Epsilon Omega Atlanta Alumni Chapter. I also serve as adjunct faculty at Tulane University School of Social Work and supervise social work interns. I also supervise interns for universities here in Georgia. I've provided numerous trainings and workshops on mental health. On a personal note, I'm married. I have a senior in high school and a sophomore in college. And I'm also an author of the book, The Reconciliation of Theology and Social Work, found at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But one of the things that happens is that clients or patients, it all depends, at some point you will find they seek treatment. So it's a lot that goes into seeking treatment and engaging in behavior. Let's see. Slide presentation.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the.
Does he have the slide presentation?
I do. Gibbs. I'm sorry, Dr. White.
I can do it without it, but I kind of like to stay focused. I don't want to ramble all night.
Leave that for me at Conclave. I'll do it for you.
Okay. So again, it's mental health and sexual assault. Next slide. We're going military here. Okay. So as you can see, survivors can experience various negative, acute, and chronic consequences following sexual victimization. All sorts of emotion, and all sorts of diagnosis as well. So anywhere from depression to anxiety. You'll hear often post-traumatic stress, some dysfunctional beliefs, some avoidant behavior. It impacts their ability to have relationships. So you want to talk about sexual dysfunctions. So when anybody comes to see me and they get an assessment, these are some basic things that are covered. But an assessment is just not tossed out there. We build rapport, and then as we begin to talk, some of these things began to manifest. And there's also some rating scales that are used as well. One of the things I like to let folks know, next slide, is that sexual assault is a common global problem. And so when people ask, well, why are we covering this? Why are we talking about this? How does it impact mental health? And I often use the example when I'm talking to, for example, college students or folks who are going out dating, and they'll say, wow, he's hurt or she's hurt. You never know the hurt when we start talking about somebody who has been victimized sexually. And so that hurt is real. And one of the things I often support is what you'll call a trauma-informed care. So given the high prevalence of sexual assault, it is important to understand which interventions and what are the most helpful ways therapeutically that can be beneficial. Also, there's formal co-therapy, and but I'm not going to really hit on that a lot, but that's involves medication management, and sometimes you'll see that with some severe cases or cases where there's PTSD or what we call moral injury. Next slide. So treatment is a specialized area of clinical practice, although it is frequently encountered in the mental health field. You want to get the right therapist, meaning I definitely believe that these issues can be dealt with by faith, but I also believe that faith also means that you want to get a professional, mental health professional who's licensed and can provide the different types of treatment that are evidence-based. Next slide. So the common therapies, and again, I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to try to use the 3B method to explain these therapies. And I'll explain the 3B method at the end. So supportive counseling is a form of talk therapy where an individual will be encouraged to vent. I stress that this is not just simple venting. The therapist will listen to what an individual has to say and then offer some important advice on how to deal with the situation. This type of therapy is very sympathetic and designed to be encouraging. Stress inoculation therapy. It is a psychotherapy method intended to help individuals prepare themselves in advance to handle stressful events successfully with minimal upset. The use of the term inoculation could, refer to like getting a shot, and you would get these skills so that you could deal with the stress associated with your traumatic experience. Then there's prolonged exposure therapy. It's a specific type of cognitive behavior therapy that teaches individuals to gradually approach trauma-related memories, feelings, and situations. Individuals work with their therapist in a safe, graduated fashion to face stimuli and situations that evoke fear and remind them of the trauma to increase their comfort and reduce their fear. Again, this is with a licensed mental health professional. Cognitive processing therapy. It's a specific type of therapy that's usually manualized. There's a manual that accompanies this therapy, and it's often used to treat PTSD. You'll find a lot of therapists in the military have been trained on CBT because it is, again, it's an evidence-based manualized treatment that has been found to be effective. Another popular one is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is a structured therapy that encourages the individual to briefly focus on the trauma memory while simultaneously experiencing bilateral stimulation, which is associated with the reduction of the vivid experiences. EMDR focuses directly on the memory, and it's intended to change the way that memory is stored in the brain, thus reducing and eliminating the problematic symptoms. Another one, which is also very common, is trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. Again, it is brief. It's about resilience building, but it definitely meets the person who is experiencing the trauma where they are. And so these are just some common therapies. Next slide. That are available. I also wanted to make sure I gave some resources because, again, I know that I wanted to definitely be brief, but often the biggest thing is when something happens, people, you'd be surprised. You see these numbers all around. People say get help, but sometimes there's some reluctance to making a call. And all of the numbers that I've listed here from the National Sexual Assault Hotline, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, these are phone numbers that can be given out regardless of where you're located. So I did get some exposure to even domestic violence, working for the Department of Defense in their family advocacy program as a treatment manager. And even my role now as Director of Psychological Health, I provide trainings for victim advocates, and they can be military members, spouses, or civilians. And I teach how to cope with trauma. I also teach self-care for those who work with victims, because sometimes folks experience what's called vicarious trauma. But that about wraps it up on my presentation. I believe the next slide is the citations, but the whole thing is, and I did use the 3B method in presenting the material, so it may have been a little fast. Again, the 3B method, my intention was to be bold, to be brief, and to be gone. Anybody have any questions?
All right. Bold, brief, and be gone. So, can we bring the rest of the presenters onto the screen, please?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Okay. Yeah. I'm loving this. I mean, I'm loving all of this for so many different reasons, right? I do have one question though. And to bring it back to, I guess, what was mentioned in the introduction, we're talking about precision medicine, which is kind of what all of us actually focuses on and whatnot. So we talked about the traumas, the legal, and from the nursing side and also from the public health side. Is there a way all this could kind of mesh together to form like a nice collage, I'll say, in terms of how we look at precision medicine as a whole?
So, in actuality, although we're all speaking differently, it actually does happen all together.
Okay.
So, and on the medical side of the house, we call it care coordination. So we would work with Dr. White as the case manager. We would contact, well, he would be the one, probably the social worker, to contact the victim advocacy and legal if necessary. So this actually does all happen together. So in essence, although we're talking about different disciplines, and in essence, it is precision medicine because in case management, it is tailored toward this patient.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So even the
Yes.
medical, the physical, the emotional, and psychological, we all work together to do it as we call it in medicine, an interdisciplinary or nursing, an interdisciplinary team, which in essence is basically precision medicine, because every discipline speaks and they basically give their part, and then we tailor a plan for each and every patient. And I know as part of at the university where I'm faculty, we even have an interprofessional education course. We have a School of Social Work and law and other disciplines where in their educational process now, we start with the interprofessional education. So then we're basically learning precision medicine even in academia. That makes sense?
Makes perfect sense. I mean, it's good that we actually encompass all of those parts together, because we look at, I guess, what the different survivor goes through. I don't want to use the term victim. Victim means they did something wrong. That's what the survivor goes through. And then, of course, hearing it from the legal perspective, but then actually getting the actual medical treatments. Yeah, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. It's beautiful. Brother, people started me to interject now, but this was really hearing it from all those perspectives was very, very eye-opening. Very eye-opening for me.
No. And that's great. But I wanted to go back to I was still stuck on it. And I know y'all probably gonna be like, "Oh my
Number
gosh,
13, right?
that 13 and 1,000." So, with that being said, with the 13 and 1,000, from the perspective of, we'll say, one size fits all. So, in this realm that you guys all play a very intricate role, from start to finish, would you guys say that one size fits all, or what would be the variations per each? I know I make sure that every situation is different. So, in tying in the medical piece, tying in the mental piece, tying in the advocate piece, then tying into the judicial piece, how does all this come together to say we have built a case?
I mean, I can weigh in a little bit on that to Hershaw's point that, so we call it a multidisciplinary team. He just used this means the same thing. And in our jurisdiction, we found that we were getting the best results when we learned to work together, when we got out of our lanes, when we put aside our egos, and it wasn't just, I know what's best because this is what I do in the courtroom. Like, whoa, slow down. I don't always know that. I need to listen to this. I need to listen to that. And when we work together like that and we communicate and we understand and respect each other's roles, that really gives us a much better result in court too. Because in order to go forward with the case, you have to have somebody who's healthy enough to do that, right? And to this point about consent, I want everyone to know that in our jurisdiction, people had to consent to going forward with a case. So on a sexual assault case, we would never force somebody to go forward. So that means if I've charged somebody and we're getting ready to go to trial, and I use the term victim when we talk about a case because that's how they're listed. But if they said to me, Jen, I can't do it, we wouldn't do it. So, I want to make sure that we're clear about that. And so our goal always was, and my goal still is, I don't speak for all prosecutors, but I can speak for the people that I worked with. And for me, as I still prosecute cases, is to make sure that I am respecting those boundaries. And that issue of consent and those boundaries also go along with how's the case going to get resolved? Will I go forward with charges if the victim doesn't want to? No. If they want to and I have the evidence, yes. Once we have the case, is it going to be a trial? If yes, is the victim ready? Do they have support? Have I worked with their team? And if we're going to work out some sort of plea or some sort of resolution short of trial, the victim's going to consent to that. It didn't happen to me. It is the state of Ohio or the state of fill in the blank against the defendant, just like Cyrell said, but it didn't happen to me. And so I want to make sure that I have consent. And so sometimes we reach agreements that don't sound great to the public, but the victim's thrilled. But I'm going to do that with that kind of information, making sure that the advocate knows, making sure that the treatment team knows, making sure that people know so that the victim feels supported, because the case isn't the end of it, right? It doesn't give closure. It doesn't just end things. There's still going to be people involved with this person long after I'm gone.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, even with treatment, so treatment can happen after the incident. One of the main things that an individual is going to get from the licensed mental health provider. So in my private practice, you're going to get total confidentiality. You may not be ready to share your story. And so one of those things is to make sure that you are in a spot where you can comfortably share. We may discuss who's asked you to speak up. You may discuss which hospital or the prosecutor, you may ask for a letter or, it really all depends. Now, I will say, though, in the military setting, things are a little bit different because we have victim advocates that still, though, they don't provide the treatment. So we want to make sure that that's a part, because when it's all said and done, sometimes you, for lack of better words, need somebody to hold your hand along the way, because dealing with this and all the different components can be overwhelming, and overwhelming to the part where folks would You would think they would share information with family members and friends, but it's just that traumatic that even that's a process. And so we don't take any part of this process lightly. It is a supportive process, but at the same time, if you are in treatment and you're my client, I'm going to protect my client sometimes from what we call the system. Because some parts of the system may not be as helpful in certain areas, and that can vary depending on your location. It's always great to have somebody who's trauma informed and knows the laws, and you have an educated population, but sometimes that's not always the case. And people may make statements inadvertently that will negatively impact somebody's mental health.
Thank you. First of all, I need to acknowledge our former 21st International Grand Polaris Robert Clark Jr. that is on the video somewhere on the cast. He is actually the creator of Ice Shield. He and his wife, Dr. Felita Clark. And so I definitely would like to acknowledge them this evening. They did put a chat in the thing thanking you for your service to the most vulnerable in our communities, nation, and around the world. Outstanding, everyone, to your informative, dedicated, and passionate anti-abuse professionals and presenters. So he'd like to thank you guys for being here this evening and for all that you do. In closing, I'm going to go do this quote unquote little round robin. And what I would like for you, each presenter, to do is your takeaway from this and then your final thoughts as far as pushing the narrative forward. How do you get individuals engaged and how do you keep this message alive? Yes, John.
Brother P, before you get into that part, Brother Hightower is going to drop a link in the chat, a post-program chat about what they thought about the program, learn more about All of Us, etc., and also getting more information about learning about All of Us and about precision medicine as a whole. So, as the coordinator for All of Us in this, I salute you all. Thank you very, very much. You really made my evening.
So on my camera, I see Cyrell first. So shocking.
Shout out to my mom. She raised a beautiful woman. And so, I have no problem going first. So the main takeaway that I want to share with you folks today, to get to the question of what's next, in terms of if you are a professional or someone who is involved in the intervention or the prevention of sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, they're really all under an umbrella, right? So we're all doing our different sectors. But what is so important is what Jen said. I'm pretty sure Hershaw said the same thing. I'm pretty sure everybody said it. Coming together as a collective and listening to each other about what's going on is going to be so critical in terms of supporting the survivor. At the end of the day, here at my job, we have SART teams, which is safe sexual assault response teams. And so that is a group of people with advocates, police, judges, folks who work at colleges, different folks who are in our position, and we're able to talk about what does trauma-informed care look like? What does supporting survivors look like? And that way, the more education we have talking about survivors and making this conversation real, then we are able to educate more people. How everybody was saying, it's based on location. Jen, rockstar prosecutor, not going to force you to proceed with charges if you don't want to. But we know that some folks might. So when Jen is talking to her prosecutor homies, listen, we got to talk about this. What's best for survivors? Talking and communicating is so important. And number two, the other takeaway, what I talked about with consent, especially in the Black community, we've got this culture of silence. So if we don't make it to these professionals, as people, even not professionals, we have to hold each other accountable. Because sexual assault, domestic violence, violence against women, violence against anybody in general is not okay. So hold your peers accountable and hold yourself accountable, and we can do better.
Thank you. Since you mentioned Jen and her prosecutor homies, Jen, what would be yours? Your final thoughts.
Yeah, so I have a couple. I think that for me as a prosecutor, make sure I know what's going on, right? Make sure, just like I said in my presentation, if there are community specific, family specific, whatever specific things about you that I need to know, tell me about them. Because you'll hopefully, by the time we're at that stage, have met with me enough or talked to me enough to know that I'm a safe person to talk to. I hopefully have made you feel that way. And if I haven't, then you need to go to somebody else within the prosecutor's office or wherever and let them know that you're not okay with that. But kind of on this more, in your own homes kind of thing, to the same point that Cyrell was saying, do some of those things in your own home too, right? Normalize talking about what's appropriate, what's a healthy relationship. Normalize talking about uncomfortable subjects and normalizing admitting when we're struggling. I mean, so many of us have had a hard time over the last year because we've been confined to our homes. We could have great, healthy family life relationships, fill in the blank. And I bet any number of us have felt like crap at some point over the last year. We've been depressed. We ate too much. We did whatever to cope. I have a 15-year-old in the house, and you're real lucky he didn't make guest appearance. He tried real hard, and I told him not to. But because he's had prosecutor mom, we have had really uncomfortable, awkward conversations in this house. And one of my proudest moments was when he said to me, "Mom, I would never treat a woman like that because you're my mom and I know better and you taught me better." And I was like, yes. Does that mean he won't screw up? No. Does it mean I will be in his business if he screws up? Yes. But that's because we've talked about sexual assault. We've talked about pornography. We've talked about domestic violence. We've talked about all these things in our household. Because I want him to know that this is a safe place. And if that's not what you're able to have in, if your own home or, people that don't have it in their home, make your home the place. I just think that that's when we start having that conversation, then that knowledge branches out. And I will continue to educate my prosecutor homies.
Thank you. Soon to be Dr. Hershaw Davis.
Brothers, thank you for this wonderful evening. Thank you for all the information, and I'm privileged to share the stage with the panelists. I also forgot to say earlier, I am a brother of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, Sal Omega Chapter. Forgive me for not saying that earlier, brothers. It's a lot of things that go through my mind. First of all, I want to say as a nurse that we are here for you. We are here to support you. We are bound to keep your confidence. Our doors in the emergency department are open 24/7. Every day of the week, rain, shine, storm, we are there. We're here for you. During this pandemic, we have seen a rise statistically in violence in homes. Again, we're here for you. Before I assumed or went into academia, I was a case manager, so that's why I know some of this material. And even when I go in, because I still work in the emergency department with the clinical practice, please understand we'll get the resources to you. Lastly, I went into academia to train the next generation of nurses because it's great to have this conversation, but we need to train the next generation to uphold ideals of consent, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and learn how to respect that when seeing patients. Because if it's not us, then I ask you who. Thank you, brothers.
Okay, doctor. Dr. White.
Just ending on the note, trauma-informed care understands and considers the pervasive nature of trauma and promotes an environment of healing and recovery. It's vital that we let folks know, especially in these hard times, that there are people who care. To me, that's one of the most important things, is letting folks know we care and there are resources available for them. So I enjoyed this opportunity to speak with everybody. Appreciate it, brothers, and meeting new folks, and encourage others to continue on in their journey. And if they need support, I am available. But again, I stress letting folks know that you care.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. White.
Amen.
John?
I said my piece earlier. Just thank y'all for being a blessing to someone, because we had a lot of viewers tonight, but you never ever know who needed to hear that word. That one word might have triggered them. That one word could have been number 14 instead of number 13.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done. I'm good. That was just this was awesome. This was awesome.
So, on behalf of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, our international Grand Polaris, Andre Manson, again, our 21st international Grand Polaris, Robert Clark and his wife, Dr. Felita Clark, John, and also currently behind the scenes, Brother Gibbs Hightower IV. I extend to you a robust thank you, Sorrell, Jen, Herschel, and Dr. White. We've been on this now call for a little over 2 hours now, but I think there's no time limit on certain subject matters, especially when we look at the quote unquote bigger picture. And when we're asking ourselves what's next, none of us knows what's going to happen when we leave our doors today. As Cyril mentioned earlier, it's not about the person in the bush. It's not about the person in that white car. It's your coworker. It's a family member. It's a friend that you trusted. It's someone that you knew, someone that you know. That could be the next perpetrator. That could be the next, could make you be the next victim of assault. And whether they're in your household, at your job, in your school, on your campus, wherever the case may be, the mall, wherever you are, my takeaway from this is A, there's definitely strength in numbers. B, there is definitely strength in encouragement. And if I know someone that is going through something, it is my job to encourage them to A, bring awareness to this, speak to someone that can help them, but more importantly, meet them where they are and be that sounding board, that voice of quote unquote reason to push them to someone like Cyril, Dr. White, soon to be Dr. Herschel, Dr. Davis, and also Jennifer. But we as a people, somewhere because we were all raised in the house, our households, that what happens in this house stays in this house. And somewhere, somehow, some way, we have to be able to be that voice that says, it's okay. And as they mentioned earlier, I support you. I hear you. Let's map out a plan whereas to we can get you to where you are. And that's my what's next. That's my what's next. So again, on behalf of the men of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, I do currently serve as the coordinator for iShield. So I thank you all this evening for all those that watched tonight. I'm hoping that there was something, whether you know of someone, whether someone you know, whatever the case may be, something triggered something in someone to make someone think that A, it's not okay, but B, we'll get to what's next. So with that, everyone, please enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, on behalf of the men of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated, all of us in the BGLC, thank you for sharing this time with us this evening. Enjoy the rest of your nights, guys.
Don't forget those links. Fill out those